So this trial of Gisele Pelicot is finally coming to an end. The closing arguments were just made. I want to go over some stuff that was said. I think I may cover this topic in different videos, but this one I want to talk about the lawyers and their closing statements, which were so powerful. I'm also going to show part of the interview I did with a famous lawyer in the United States. This is Michelle Simpson Teague. I did a live with her about a month ago, and it was honestly one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. And we talked about this case a little, but if you don't know who she is, she's been on all of the news for a long time. She's gotten some of the biggest settlements that we know of. Some of the biggest cases in U.S. history for sexual assault, including the Olympics. Remember this case against Larry Nassar? Michelle was one of the many lawyers who helped get a settlement. Even cases that people don't know as much about, like another Olympic athlete, Asia Evans, who also had to sue a doctor for SA. Anyway, I'll put links to all this in the caption. But Michelle is a powerhouse, and she deals so much with these cases and wrongful death cases too. Yeah, so at the end, I'm going to include a clip of her of us talking about this. We talked for like 2.5 hours. So this is just like, and this was all on my Patreon, on my live. So if you're a part of that, you can go watch this at any time. But this case is historic. But what happens, what they decide is going to be historic. It is either going it's a lot of pressure, but how they handle what is decided in terms of guilt or no guilt, in terms of how long the sentence and all that is going to set a precedent. And one of the things I didn't understand how important lawyers are. We all, they get such a bad rep, but lawyers, they can either be, their powers can be used for evil or for good, depending on the scenario. But I want to talk about the lawyers who represented her in their closing statement. On The Guardian, they had a summary of the closing statement, but I'm going to try to pull up some of the exact quotes that were, kind of looked over, because this, it gave me chills. I'm always trying to keep my sleeping dog in this. This is a hard topic. Everybody needs a therapy dog right now, even if he's just doing that. Now, originally when the media was saying originally that, she opened up the doors to the change, the shame can change sides. That's the slogan of this trial. But really what she meant by that is that not only did she not want to bear the burden of facing over 50, but she was graped by more than that. But, for victims to sit in the courtroom with these men who've done this to her, so, having the press there made her not have to sit there alone with just her lawyers and some of her family. But we had to sit there. And even though they didn't have cameras filming all of this, there were reporters there. And the journalists who covered this story, I have so much respect for. I cannot imagine for 10 weeks going and watching these videos, these horrific videos, and listening to these men say, yeah, I know I did all the things that you said I did, but I didn't grape her. The way they can just be I did all that, but I did it because they refused to admit that what they did was literally grape. So the reason, one of the main reasons why she wanted to have this trial public was in the hope of ending grape culture, or, we know it's not going to end overnight. Also grape itself, but it's the culture. And this trial showed what the culture is like, not just in terms of the way these men talked, but the way Gisele was treated. The way all of the defendants had, at least most of them had a woman or multiple women coming in and, caping for them and being but they're a good guy. So again, this is not just a man problem, because we know it's not just men who grape, but this is also a enabling problem, individual enablers and systemic enablers, right? So her two lawyers both gave great speeches, but one of them was we do not believe that grape culture is an inevitability. This is a country of progress. Rape is not a part of the future of this society that we want. Another one stated that Gisele and her children hope that making the trial public would lead to a change of mentality and a better future that ends the violence from another age. They said that Gisele does not regret for 1 second her decision to hold the trial open and force a public debate. So, we do not want to idolize victims, because that plays into the, you know what I mean? I've did a lot of videos about Gisele, and I kind of fell into that idolizing the victim thing. And, of course I did, but I do really, really, I admire her endurance. I admire her using all of that rage and channeling it towards change and putting herself through the ringer while doing that. Because there is the second grape. There's literally books written about it. And as somebody who's experienced it myself, the act itself is so violent, but the reaction of the society, the way the court treats you, all of these other things do so much harm, sometimes even more harm. And if you haven't read Know My Name, oh my God, I forgot her name. I forgot her name. This was the survivor of the Brock Turner case. Hopefully I'll remember to put a link to it in the caption. One of the best books I've ever read. One of the best books I have ever read, and understood my experience as a survivor. He said, in the opening the doors to the courtroom, she didn't just want to show the crude reality of the grape itself, but also the way in which in France in 2024, people still defend grape. And that has been such a critical part of this case. It's not just like learning about what all happened, because that's horrifying. But for 10 weeks, those of us who've been following this trial have listened to the way these men will justify what they did. The way the women attached to these men will justify what they did and excuse it. The lawyers treat this case. And even that one lady, what's her butt, wants to be a social media influencer and is literally like insulting Gisele outside of the courtroom. Ugh. He said it was unacceptable to hear the majority of men in court admit, when confronted with the video evidence, that sexual acts took place, but deny that it constituted grape. He said they did it by accident, involuntary, unintentionally, or because the husband said it was fine, right? All of them, almost all of them fell under this thing of like, he manipulated. It's crazy. It's not crazy. It's actually totally predictable in what they always do. But like the fact that with all of the arrogance and hubris, they went on the stands and said, well, yeah, I did this, but I didn't mean to. I was being stupid. Whatever. I've done videos on this. I'll do a little bit more to wrap up some of the details of this case. He said the argument that many of the men that they had made a mistake in graping her while she was unconscious in her bed puts the whole of society in danger because it risks more cases like this. So I love the way they close their closing arguments were like, hey, president, or whoever the people are who are making this decision, you need to think about this decision you make. If you let all these men off because they, oopsie, grape, didn't mean to, you are setting a very dangerous precedent for all future generations. Know your job here. They also pointed out that the Gisele Pelicot situation, for which she has won support all over the world and is applauded by crowds upon her arrival to court every day, was exceptional. Not all victims are lucky enough to be applauded every morning and emerge from court to a guard of honor by supporters, encouraging them back in the next day. Most victims, I'd say all victims except her and maybe like 5 or something, don't get that. They don't get any support. They have to, on their own will and their own courage and their own stubbornness and determination, have to go back and get assaulted again and again every day in the courtroom, and they still do it. So don't forget this. Nobody is getting applause when they leave a courtroom after someone trying to destroy them again in front of other people after already trying to do that in privacy. That situation usually does not exist. Most go through this alone, shut in the courtroom with their rapist. That's the reality. So they wanted to remind everybody, and especially the people deciding the fate of all of these defendants, what you do with this decision, despite all of this video evidence, literally proof, what you decide here, do not take that lightly. He went on to say that the Pelicot courtroom hearings were a kind of laboratory that would lead society to reflect on grape. He said there must be a rethink of how defense in Rape Mason's work, saying the trial has shown that in a grape case in France in 2024, there is still a discussion of whether you're a good victim, as if there was such a thing as a good or bad victim of grape. Those defense strategies no longer have a place in the court in France in the 21st century. How in France in 2024 can a woman still be subjected to what was inflicted on Gisele Pelicot for the last 10 years? How in France can we find at least 50 men, but in reality it was around 70 men, some of whom never were identified by police, within a 50-kilometer radius? That's a 31 within 31 miles of her house. There were 70 men willing to go and do this to her, to come and even without taking her, without even talking to her, he abused this inert body that appeared dead. There was literally like at least one dude was like, I don't know. I mean, I thought she was dead. Like, but you know what? The media will still say headlines. I did a video about this a year ago when they talk about a corpse being raped. They say schmegs. They don't even say grape, as if you can't, like, a dead person or a drugged person can't consent. It's grape. You know? Next week, public prosecutors will recommend sentencing. The defense lawyers will take several weeks to sum up for the accused, and the 5 judges will deliver their verdict on December 20th. So there's about a month before we're going to find out what happens. But just so y'all know, from my understanding, I believe, I forget the number, but the way the law works right now, and I don't know how this is going to play out with this case, but if you grape one person or 50, it's the same. I hope that law is rethought after this. So some of Gisele's closing statements, because I actually want to talk about the sons and the daughter in another video. That's a whole nother video. It's they testified in the last week or so, and very revealing, y'all. This is just about the lawyers in the final statement. And Gisele said, "For me, this is a trial of cowardice. There is no other way to describe it." And besides what they did to her, of course she's angry about that, but she's angry that none of them ever thought to do anything to stop this. When you walk into a bedroom and see a motionless body, at what point do you decide not to react? Why do you not leave immediately and report it to the police? This woman lost 10 years of her life, 10 years of being a victim of heinous crimes, because not a single one of them reported it. Not a single one. Even the ones who didn't go through with it, which was like not many, never thought, oh, maybe I should tell someone. Even an anonymous tip. It is time for society to look at this macho, patriarchal society and change the way it looks at grape. And she also said very clearly she would never forgive her husband, nor should she. Just to remind people, one of the things that the defense lawyers did, they noted, that she's been under her husband's control and tricked for a decade. So how could she not think it was possible that he tricked and controlled all these men? This elderly man controlled all these men. And she said, he drugged me. I know that defense lawyers are just doing their job, but there's also a code of ethics, and there's a way that you do your job. And some of these were completely just awful. Another lawyer said that she seemed to have more sympathy for her ex-husband than the other accused. And so this lawyer poised that perhaps Ms. Pelicot is still under her husband's control. She said, that's your analysis. All of my life, I've been a very positive person. I will keep with me the best of this man. She's been working through her anger for a long time, and her son actually, and I'm going to give another video on this, gave a chilling account of how he realized she was processing all of this and her rage. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I got to stay focused. This is some of the stuff she's been doing. Honestly, I think I'm really worried about her after this trial is over, because she's been holding it together for this trial. And at least this burden is off of her, but processing this, I hope her little heart can handle it. She's old. She's not like 100, but this is so much for an older person to endure. It's too much for any human to endure. This lady right here. No respect for this lady. This is the one, and Michelle and I are going to talk. We talked about this in the interview, which I'll show a clip in a minute, of what she did. Ridiculous. Miss Pelicot recognized that her ex-husband was the orchestra conductor and that it was not only her family that had been destroyed in the fallout, but it's the families of all these 50 dudes on trial. But while they might have been manipulated to get them to the house, once the men were in the bedroom and saw her state, they should have left and called the police. Full stop. They knew exactly what they were doing once they were in there. None of them were manipulated by this man. If he was like Hulk Hogan or something, Hulk Hogan's old now, but whatever. The Rock. This is an elderly old man, and all of them were like, I feel helpless. He tricked me. He made me do it. I was scared. She also, by opening the court, everybody knows her and her name. And she even got criticized for keeping her name. And when I heard her response, I was like, oh. While her children and grandchildren have been ashamed of their name at the beginning of the trial, Miss Pelicot says that she believes they're now proud. Today, I am known around the world, whether I like it or not. People remember Madame Pelicot, much less Monsieur Pelicot. What they left out of this, and maybe I'll bring the quote up if I can find it, is that her grandchildren have this name, and she wants them to associate their name that they didn't choose to have with a family that faced the most horrific thing in order to move the needle and fight against grape culture in France. Not because of what one man with that name did, but what her and her whole family went through for justice and to also protect their community and hopefully get change, systemic change. I loved that reframing. I love that. I don't care that that's his name. It's her name. It's the family's name. And they shouldn't all have to change their name because of what one person did. So some other quotes from her lawyer. By the way, this is one of the journalists I've been following. I have found so many amazing journalists here in France because of this case. And I cannot imagine showing up to this trial day in, day out for 10 weeks and reporting on this and watching these videos and just, God, this is very hard. Some of y'all know this. This has been very, very hard for me to report on. And I'm not even there. I'm not even in the same room with all these grapists listening what they say. I am reading the reporting of the reporters on it. So this is why we need journalism. As much as the media can do terrible things, but the journalists are doing very hard work to get these stories out. So much respect. So one of the lawyers says, without these videos, it is quite likely that the sexual abuse of Gisele would have continued until she was killed. So the lawyers talked a lot about the personal responsibility of every single person that was in that room. Everyone in their own way, at their own level, contributed to this monstrosity of a woman's ordeal. Even a lawyer on the defense benches acknowledged that it bordered on torture and barbarity. I don't know I don't know this reference. He also went in to talk about the suffering of the daughter, which I want to make a whole separate video about the daughter and the daughter-in-law and the children and what they're going through and how they're dealing with this and some of their statements, but that's another video. But I love that he brought up that Caroline, the daughter, who there was pictures of her in her mother's underwear, asleep, looking to be like drugged. So Caroline is sure that he did to her what he did to her mother. But he won't admit it. He won't admit anything with the children because he does it because that's like, he won't admit it. She's so angry, but again, that's another video. Caroline will not be able to fully recognize in her status as a victim, but will remain with the same dizzying, unbearable questions, which are slowly destroying her. So on some level, because he refuses to admit it, the daughter is going to suffer even more because she doesn't get any kind of closure. It's like she has to live with this idea that she knows he did it, but she doesn't know for sure because he refuses to admit it. If this trial can at least serve some purpose, be useful without waiting for legislative reform, it is to integrate into our consciousness the springs of this diabolical modus operandi. How can we imagine that the danger comes from within, at the very, very heart of a home that we think is safe and loving? I love this so much. This is so necessary. Stressing that Dominique Pelicot had never shown them anything but his A side, the A side of his disturbed and divided personality. Now, again, I think what this case, and I've talked about this in another video, I think what this case is hopefully going to start, and it already has here in France, conversations about just because there's no physical violence, just because there's no like proof of or whatever of like sexual violence, that They have talked about he was somebody that they walked on eggshells around a little bit because he did have occasional angry outbursts and stuff like that. He idolized Gisele. He called her a saint and all of these things that I actually think that we need to take way more seriously now because, but I've talked about it. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in other videos because again, predators like this can hide so many things for so long. And yet at the same time, there are subtle things that when we ignore them, we pay the price. He had to put his wife to sleep to make him suffer his B-side. And then, so this is I'm just concluding here. In France in 2024, it is still necessary for a victim to go through the almost obligatory phase of demonstrating that one is a good victim. As if in fact that woman has outside the crime scene a liberated, perhaps even unbridled functionality would be disqualifying for occupying the benches of civil parties. A pornographic film actress could not be a victim of it. And then he gives examples of how ridiculous this is about really hitting on this perfect victim thing that harms all victims. We have come to reproach Gisele Pelicot for showing indulgence towards her ex-husband, for not setting herself up as Dominique Pelicot's second prosecutor. She is not sufficiently in hatred towards him, right? She's not mad enough at him. She doesn't hate him enough. She doesn't yell at him enough. She's not She's not bah. Okay, no, she's not a perfect victim for that. And in pronouns, AI is always going to get this wrong. It's she, but they always default to he. She was even criticized for not crying enough. A way of suggesting that there was a suspicious collusion. The defense tried to do that. That this was a collusion. That maybe she's guilty of making all these poor innocent rapists, that they are the victims of her collusion. Seriously, y'all. Talks about the defense lawyers, saying this whole thing, she'd be falling out of love in the way which bonds patiently woven over 50. Oh, God. Even if she were in denial, rather than resilience, which is what she's in right now, what exactly do we regret on the defense side? That she didn't shoot herself in the head? Oh, my God. I love these lawyers. I love these lawyers so much. Because her life would no longer have any meaning. She was even criticized with barking at him for not awarding medals to the accused who confessed. It seems to me that yesterday we slipped into a form of courtroom abuse, I dare say. And he was referring to a bunch of questions from the defense, and that's another video, but it was ridiculous. If the defense is free, it says a lot about what we are. It has been said a lot about the accused that they are ordinary people, but we do not believe that the ordinary people exist, just as we do not believe in monsters. It's time to understand that rapists are not necessarily serial. They can rape once in your life. There is no profile of a rapist. The questions that obsess Gisele Pelicot and her family is, how could this situation have happened? How could these men have objectified her to such an extent, reduced her to the state of a receptacle, when she could have been their mother and for some their grandmother? After 2.5 months of the debate, we remain as if trapped in a labyrinth that we could not find a common denominator. But it is impossible to find it. This is where he brings it. So there's no such thing as a perfect victim, and there's no such thing as the perfect rapist. There's no profile. Not all of them suffered sexual violence as children or adolescents. Not all of them are perverts. Not all of them have a criminal record. Not all of them were in the form of emotional or sexual insecurity. Some were married. Because yes, they and I can talk about this. Some of these men had child porn on their computers. One of them had bestiality stuff. So a lot of them come from abuse, but that does not excuse the decision that they made that day that they were in the bedroom. None of it does. Some of them have literally no excuse. Some of them tried to use abuse, their former abuse as children, as an excuse. But some of them, they couldn't find anything to blame it on. Isn't the answer ultimately in the notion of free will? If Gisele Pelicot was deprived of it for 10 years, isn't free will precisely what connects all the accused together? Free will. Not a common profile, not motive, not that. Free will. She did not have free will for those 10 years when she was drugged. They all did. Psychiatric assessments have confirmed this to us. No psychological disorder has affected their discernment or control of their action. Right? They had endless psychologists and psychiatrists they interviewed. Even if some were deceived about the scenario and that what they would find once they were there, The manipulation stops at the bedroom door. Once they entered that bedroom, they had free will. They chose to trust this stranger they didn't know, whom they had met a few hours earlier on a website. They all chose to impose their vision of what consent is in the sexual matter. Oh God, I have chills. Only 2 individuals came forward to say that they had refused Dominique Pelicot's project. Gisele Pelicot would have every reason in the world to be in hatred today. Who would blame her? She would have every reason to castigate male sexuality in general. The choice to have 2 men carry this voice was not a coincidence. It was a carefully considered decision. And I love that. I love that she has men doing this fight for her against all these men. I'm not saying that men would do it better or that it's more important that men do it. But it is symbolic to see some men doing this. Now, as I talked about with Michelle, there are some men doing this who are doing it very unethically. And so you have to be very careful if you have a male lawyer doing this. And you also have to be careful of the female, because that one woman who is the defense attorney is doing more damage than any of her male colleagues in terms of attacking Gisele, even out of the courtroom. Despite what she had suffered, she has chosen to transform this mud into noble material and to overcome the darkness of her history to find meaning in it. She is now counting on the court with her family to help her. Michelle and I talked about that too, about like this can provide healing for some. It can also provide further trauma for others. And you really have to decide which it is, because sometimes going into a case like this is so much more traumatizing, and other times it is so healing and necessary and gives a sense of purpose. I'll probably show that clip in another one. My interview with Michelle was just so amazing. On the morning of November 2nd, 2020, before going to the police station, they had breakfast together. At 9 a.m., she entered the police station without knowing that the next few minutes her life would be swallowed up forever. At the end of the morning, she went home alone and thought for a moment about disappearing too. But she made the choice not to disappear, to face the tsunami. The phenomenal power of this wave that engulfs everything in an instant. The tsunami, the rape victims experienced it and had to invent solutions to survive. Gisele Pelicot experienced hundreds of grapes frozen forever in photographs. Ugh. She understood that her medical ordeal was in fact artificial. We had to wait for the results of this of the test to discover that she had 4 STDs. Luckily had escaped HIV. And then the discovery of the unthinkable numbers of them that they'd had several hundred times over a decade. And then the location of these abuses at her home. At her home. That is one of the things that is so... Your home is supposed to be your safe place. In her bedroom, at her daughter's, during a vacation. Gisele Pelicot walked along a precipice knowing that if she fell there, she would not be able to get back up. She carried this feeling of shame with her for years, wherever she went. She made the choice to move on out on her own to try to rebuild life. Deep down, something was broken. She knew she couldn't just start rebuilding her life until she was alone. Her children respected her choice. They were a close-knit, loving family who considered themselves lucky to be connected to each other. A family whose parents' house always had its doors open, wide open. Look where they are today, 4 years later. It was in an attempt to survive that Gisele Pelicot went to live alone. For her new entourage, she became this woman with a mysterious past who didn't like to talk much about her past. This smiling woman, but who could see lost in an ocean of melancholy. She is this woman who was so well described, dead inside, but evolving among the living. At the end of 2023, seeing that her story was beginning to be relayed by the media, a feeling of revolt began to take shape in Gisele Pelicot's mind. She decided to take back control of her life. The time had come for shame to change sides. She decided to know everything, to see everything. Still speaking at a very brisk pace, specifically that she set out to watch the videos of the accused. Imagine watching your own grave. Like hundreds of hours. She expected nothing from the accused, but they still managed to disappoint her. They chose a mode of defense, which is that of cowardice, of refusing to recognize the obvious. A mode of defense which, according to him, is revealing of grape culture. By treating her as they did, the accused reduced her to the status of an object, stripping her of the right to freely dispose of her body, of her right to be treated as a human being. She was put in a situation where it was impossible to stop this violence. She will never get back this lost freedom. Almost all of the accused adopt the following reason. They admit to having penetrated her. They admit to not having obtained her consent. But the conclusion they draw from these findings is that Gisele Pelicot was not the victim of grape by them. In reality, what the accused are really pleading is a simple and banal error of judgment, oopsie, of which they hold Dominique Pelicot responsible. Theirs was an error of judgment, but he's responsible. In criminal matters, error is very rarely admitted as an effective means of defense. It must be accusable and show that a reasonable person in the same circumstances could have made this mistake. There is not the slightest hint of a right to make a mistake about the consent of an unconscious woman without even taking the trouble to speak to her beforehand. In reality, Gisele Pelicot consent was never a subject of concern for the accused. Their sovereign, complete contempt is evident in the criminal file and in the remarks made in this courtroom. He lists dozens of statements made by the defense during the proceedings. She was asleep, but her husband told me that she was consent. Subsequently, many of the accused went on the grounds of coercion, of alleged pressure from Dominique Pelicot. No video attests to this pressure. Every time they said this, the lawyers would bring up the video and they're like, where do you see that? You are having fun here. Look at, you're enjoying yourself. You're smiling. Where is the coercion? Snoring. Similar, there's no evidence that the accused were drugged. The defense invites us to believe that without the beginning of proof of chemical submission leading to grape, that this was a new insult to Gisele, who herself knows, she knows what chemical submission looks like. And these defendants had the audacity to try to suggest that maybe they had been drugged too. And also, none of the accused ever considered it useful to file a complaint, right? If they had been coerced and drugged by this man, if they were victim too, why didn't they file a complaint? This victimization has only grown over the weeks, as if the consequences of the grapes were not their fault. I ask you to reject the right to make mistakes put forward by the accused. This would endanger society as a whole. Specifically, that this argument has historically been rejected. And then he references this case where the defense lawyers but he was kind, he's hardworking, you know? We're in 2024 and still have to hear that men accused of grape are also victims. There was a long talk of having Gisele Pelicot say that her grapists might themselves be victims of him, with at the bottom a form of reproach. Wouldn't the good victim be the one who doesn't speak then? The man who grapes is no more a victim than the drunk driver who causes a serious accident and gets injured himself. We hear that men accused of grape are appreciated, integrated, or do not have the profile of a grapist. That this is what, for a very long time, prevented the revelation of many grapes and sexual abuses. They are men above all suspicion. Oh, they couldn't possibly do anything because look at else they've done. The grapist is the man who commits grape. That's it. No more, no less. When a woman is graped, whatever people say, it is still a little bit her fault. Gisele Pelicot was questioned about these signals that she didn't know how to interpret. We spent a long time looking to see if, in her behavior, she had provoked her husband. Gisele Pelicot only had to know her husband better and interpret his symptoms better. Yeah, who wouldn't think, because they're losing their memory, that it wasn't a brain tumor or Alzheimer's? Who would think, oh, I bet my husband is graping me for 10 years and drugging me every night? Grape was never been the object of such visceral rejection in France, but its realization has never been so easy. And referring to the sites that this was able, the site Coco was all about chemical submission. There needs to be a change in the idea that the woman's body is an object of conquest. We do not believe that grape is inevitable, believing that there are reasons for hope that we see thousands of people who have crowded into this judicial building. For him, this trial made it possible to document the place of grape in 2024. This trial has put a magnifying glass on how society collectively and how the systems themselves treat this subject. It has been so enlightening, so necessary, so tragic, so enraging, and also inspiring. That anybody has this whole team that is going there every day to try to get justice. They do give us hope. This trial and the decision that your court will make will be part of a testament for future generations. We will judge the lessons that we will have been learned from our debates. We will discover the name of Gisele Pelicot and her courage. Ms. Pelicot, I am certain that you have done your part of the work. You have gone beyond what could be expected of you. So that's just some of what happened in the last few days. And now I want to show the interview I had with Michelle. We talk about some of this stuff. And this was like a month ago, so we didn't even know as much as we do now. But I really wanted to know the difference, like what someone like a lawyer who deals with cases like this, big cases too, her take on this, because it's a different culture, it's a different country, it's a different legal system. But at the end of the day, they're all very similar, you know? And it is hard to comment on another country and their system and all of that stuff. But as someone who is in these courtrooms every day with lawyers and defense attorneys and defendants who are doing the same thing, her insight is priceless. So I hope you enjoy.
It can be really hard in places where you're not just battling the actual violation that happened to your client. You're battling something so much bigger than that, with the beliefs of your judge, your prosecutor, your defense counsel, your jurors.
Yeah.
And you know, I think we're seeing some of that. And that's one of the really incredible things about what Gisele is doing in France. She is battling that and taking that on. I mean, just the very definition of consent now in France is being discussed and rethought because of what she's doing. And
although I have a question about that, because that you, in your France 24 interview about the Weinstein case, you said it really brought up the intent and consent and those two topics. And that is one thing in this particular case.
Sorry to do this, y'all, but I'm going to make a part 2 because Michelle and I talked so much about this and had such a great conversation, and I don't want to cut that short. Here's some of the stuff that Michelle's done. She's won some of the most incredible cases, and in our interview, she also gives a lot of insight into what victims can do, whether they should come forward or not, all kinds of stuff. So stay tuned for part 2, where we really go into more details around this case. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for all my Patreon people. Who that's the only way I can continue to do this work, because I can't, it's not sustainable with the algorithms and what the platforms pay. So thank you for everybody who supports my work. And those of you who also support through commenting, liking, and sharing and all that stuff. Everything really helps. And thank you for the journalists and for all the lawyers out there who taking on cases like this. Thank you to the journalists who are reporting on cases like this. And thank you for your time listening to stuff like this so that we can all become more informed and keep moving this needle forward, especially given what's coming after this election. And as always, I end my videos with some dog photos, something to make you feel okay while you type a comment or do whatever you need to do. Just look at this adorable dog just living his best dog life. It's not talking about a grape case. Anyway, take care of yourself, y'all. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And stay tuned to part 2, where Michelle and I go into more details of this case. Thanks so much. Bye.